right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this gorgeous evening for the second public meeting on the East Jewell Ave Bikeway project. And my name is Afor Chavez. I am the Community Engagement Specialist with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. I will be your moderator tonight, and I am really excited to be coming here tonight to share with you a lot of the updates that have been made to this project and to this design that are really based on your feedback. So I'll introduce the rest of the team that is with us here tonight. There we go. We also have Jen Hillhouse, she's our planning director, and Ashley Grace, she's a community designer. Sam Piper is the planning lead, and then we also have Brett Boncourt, who's our engineer, and Mark Daniels, who is a project manager. They'll be available to answer some questions for us this evening. That's the team with us tonight. So obviously due to COVID-19, we've implemented some new ways to connect with the community. Some people may be familiar with these virtual meeting platforms, others may not. Just a couple things to remember: we are recording this meeting. We will be having the Q&A box open there at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to type in your questions and some comments there. We ask that everybody does just remain respectful of all the people who are in the meeting tonight, as well as your Dottie staff. Everybody will be muted throughout the evening, throughout the meeting, and that's really to make sure that we are providing everyone with the same opportunity to weigh in and participate, and also to allow everybody to hear the information that we're really excited to be sharing with you tonight. There will be some question and answer breaks. We're saving a lot of time at the end of the meeting for Q&A. So type in those questions. We're going to get to as many as possible. We may not get to all of them, just as in any meeting. We may not have the time to get to everything, but there will be materials available after the meeting. They're on the website, that bit.ly/bike paving. And then you also have our email address there. So again, we'll get to as many questions as possible, and we'll be prioritizing questions that haven't been addressed before, haven't been addressed throughout the presentation, and that are really new to this conversation. So what kinds of things can we expect tonight? You know, we've spent a lot of time going through all your comments, your emails, all the notes, everything that we've received from you, and have taken that feedback and integrated a lot of that into this design. So we're excited to share that with you. We really encourage everybody to kind of listen, follow along with us as we're sharing this information, because many of the questions and concerns that you brought to us have been addressed in this final design. They're based on your community input. So we'll also go over the schedule for the project and then some next steps, the things that we can expect after that. So at this point, we're going to dive in. I'm going to hand it over to Jen, and she's going to just give us a little bit of a refresher as to where we're at.
Thanks, Afor, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As many of you know, the city is currently working on several bike projects and safety projects across the city. And this is really in order to implement complete networks and help advance our mobility goals and reach Vision Zero commitments. Our work is driven by a decade of mobility planning, and this project has been consistently identified as a priority since the initial planning in 2011. Paving has provided the opportunity to move this project forward this year, and we've been collecting feedback to inform project implementation for over the last 6 months. And we look forward to sharing what we've heard and what we've learned with all of you tonight. And a big thank you for your participation and feedback received to date. You've helped us make this project more than a bike project, and it wouldn't have developed this way without your input you've shared with us since February. I'm going to hand it to Ashley to discuss how this project fits into our local network.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, team, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to just walk through a couple slides to help make sure we're all oriented to where we're talking about. So starting with this slide shows you the extent of the bike project we're here to discuss this evening. East Jewell Avenue running from South Bellaire Street to South Oneida Street. You can see that this is a really important connection within our Denver Moves bicycle network that we're working to create. Next slide, please. So an important purpose of this project is to help build out Denver's growing bicycle network so that every home is within a 1/4 mile radius of quality bike facility. This map shows both existing and recommended facilities for Denver Moves. The recommended are those that are dashed. This project will help provide an important bike connection between the Colorado Light Rail Station, Cook Park, the Cherry Creek Trail, and the Highline Canal Trail. That means it benefits users of all of those facilities, as well as everyone in between. As you can see, this is really the first of multiple facilities we plan to build out in this part of town. Future projects will include important north and south connections, such as the bike lane on Dahlia. On Ivy Street, we are planning for a neighborhood bikeway, etc. So it has been noted, I point out Dahlia because it has been noted in some of the comments we've received that there are already bike signs on Dahlia, but those are kind of a remnant of our old bike network. But what we are working again on designing via our Denver Moves bike network is a bike network that provides folks within a 1/4 mile distance access to a safe and convenient bike network. I also want to point out on this slide that Denver is a really robust grid network available to vehicles that allows users to move around, vehicles and drivers to move around Denver pretty easily and conveniently. And that's kind of the same goal we're trying to reach with our bike network, is to create a network that allows folks who choose to bike a safe, comfortable network that allows them to move conveniently and to the places that they need to go throughout the city. Next, please. So we have looked at other alternative routes and options. Those are questions we've received quite a bit, is why Jewell? So this emphasizes where Florida is. There's been questions, well, what about Florida? We already have Florida. Florida is about a 1/2 mile away from Jewell. So again, that's outside of our goal of providing a comfortable bike facility within a 1/4 mile. It is pretty clear that we need something a little bit farther south that provides that comfortable east-west connection. Next slide, please. When we look below Florida, we can see that there really aren't a lot of streets. Actually, Jewell's really the only major street that connects east-west in this area of town. There are east-west streets, but there's a lot of connectivity issues, including on Mexico. I know that was brought up a lot. We have looked at Mexico as an option, but there are a lot of challenges with Mexico as an east-west connection route. So that's, again, another reason why Jewell is standing out to us as an important east-west connection in this area. And if you look, next slide, please. If you look below Jewell, you can see that there really isn't any option besides, as far as an east-west connection that cuts all the way through besides Evan. And we definitely do not want to be directing folks to ride their bikes along Evans at this time. Next slide, please. So now we want to shift to all the feedback we've received, because that's really the point of this, is to say we have been listening to you all since we came to you in early 2020. So we're going to walk through that feedback. We're going to talk through the questions we received and really try to help, or hopefully address most of them. So starting with that for the next slide, which highlights just the category or the types of feedback we have received since January of this year. You can see we've received a lot of feedback and we have been listening very diligently. I know we haven't always had all of the time in the world to respond to every single email, phone call we have received, but we have been tracking them. We have been talking about them in our bike meetings, etc. You can see parking is clearly an important concern, which makes a lot of sense. We're talking about a big parking trade-off. So parking is something we will definitely talk through at great length today, this evening. But we also want to point out that after parking, and actually, if you add up both the next two categories, which are all about multimodal safety, those are a pretty important piece of feedback we have received over and over and over. And so that's really important to Dottie and has definitely been an important part of what we have considered as we've moved forward with the design. Next slide, please. So again, just to kind of group those key themes or concerns we've been hearing. Again, we've heard a lot of concerns with the change to parking. We've heard a lot of concerns about safety for all users of Jewell, whether you're on a bike, you're walking, etc. Definitely a lot of bike safety and bike safety as it relates to the type of bike facility we're planning on installing here on Jewell. And we've also heard a lot about street operations. And finally, we've heard a lot about how can we make sure we're really improving connections to all key destinations in this area. So before we get into addressing, in great detail all the feedback we've heard, we do want to pop up a quick poll just to get a quick sense of kind of what everyone's main concerns are this evening and why you're joining us. So if you want to pop that open. There we go. All right, so if everyone wants to click on their response to this, the question is, what element are you most interested in learning more about tonight? You can really only select one, but this helps us understand why you're here and what we can really make sure we explore it at great lengths. So give everyone just a little bit of time to fill this out. All right, hopefully it doesn't take too long to click on an answer. I'm gonna close this poll in just another second or two. All right, do you mind closing the poll, please? All right, so again, similar to the feedback we've been receiving, definitely a lot of concerns about the changes to parking. 56% of you all, that's your top concern. Followed by safety, which is again in line with what we've been hearing with our feedback. So 22% for all users, 8% for bicycle safety. Then the street operation questions, followed by improved connections to destinations. Awesome. Thank you very much. With that, I think I'm handing it over to Sam. Is that correct?
I think I'll jump in right before
you.
that. We can get the next slide up here. After this one. There we go. So I know you guys are probably all kind of sitting there wondering, well, what's new to us? What haven't we heard before? Tell us something new. This really kind of just highlights a lot of the specific concerns we've heard from you all, particularly as parking, as we just saw in the poll. We've heard that people are concerned that the western end of the corridor is more heavily parked, and removal of that will be a burden on the community, along with Esther's Pub, those local businesses along there. They really need some sort of parking options. And then we've also heard some folks kind of, concerned about safety as they're crossing the street to their vehicles if they have to park across the street. We heard loud and clear that safety is a concern for you guys as pedestrians and those intersections. So we'll be addressing that, and we're excited to share some of those updates, as well as congestion on Holly Street, that backup there can cause some challenges for pedestrians and bicyclists. There are a couple homes there along the corridor that don't have driveways, so we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as the connections to the I-25 bike ped bridge and the Highline Canal. So put down your forks, ladies and gentlemen, and your keypads. Sam's got a lot of great information to share with you regarding the updates to this design that you have not seen before. So he's going to jump into that for us next.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Good evening. Sam Piper here. Thank you for joining. So as aforementioned, this series of slides is really going to talk through the feedback that you gave us and how this has resulted in a really better project and changes that we've made based on that. So I'm going to work through and kind of frame the questions that we have heard consistently through the project, and then how we have used that feedback to influence how the design is played out. So we just saw it in the poll. There's a lot of feedback tonight around the concerns with parking. So we just wanted to reiterate what our process was for data collection for parking. So we had initially collected parking at 2 different time periods. The first was a early weekday morning, and then an evening period. And what we found through that data collection is, generally speaking, along the corridor, parking use was low. And after our initial outreach with the community, we got feedback that you all thought it was necessary to do additional parking data collection. So we went back out and we collected data for a weekday morning. And so this gave us a really good perspective, all different time periods of the day, early morning, later morning, in the evening, how parking is used along the corridor. And what we found is that parking, generally speaking, is lightly used along the entire street. So this green bar that you consistently see says that the average parking use is between 0 and 15% used. There are several blocks indeed that we did not collect any cars being parked along those specific blocks. But what we did recognize, and what you did tell us, is that on the western portion of the corridor, parking use is higher, and the data clearly shows that. And so if we go to the next slide, again, we did hear from you all that parking is most heavily used on the western side of the corridor. And as Ashley mentioned, what this project is connecting to on the west is that I-25 and pedestrian bridge. And as Jen mentioned, our goal is complete networks. It's really critical that we complete these gaps to our community's assets. But we recognize that it could be an undue burden on the community to continue that bike lane further to the west. And so Bellaire Street does not have a recommendation for a bike facility in Denver Moves. You may recall that Dahlia is that north-south connection, and that's east of Cherry Street. So what we wanted to communicate tonight is based on the feedback that you've provided, that parking use is highest on the western portion of this corridor. This project will end at South Cherry Street. So this is reducing the parking impact to the community where that parking use is the highest. So on the next slide, another thing that we consistently heard through the outreach process is that local businesses do rely on the parking along East Jewell Ave. And we did see this when we went out and did outreach, and specifically with Esther's Pub. So we have reached out to Esther's Pub. We've communicated the feedback that we've gotten from the community. And we wanted to let you all know tonight that we're making some changes specifically to offset this impact. So as you may be aware, there is parallel parking on East Atlantic Place today. And so we're actually converting that parallel parking to angled parking to increase the number of parking spaces directly along the street that Esther's Pub is located, to provide that parking right at the front door of the pub. In addition to that, we are re-signing the parking regulations along South Holly Street to make it really clear that that unrestricted parking is available. And folks may think that, well, parking along Holly Street isn't the most comfortable today, and we have heard that. And so we've also heard that traveling through the intersection of Holly and Jewell can be challenging as a bicyclist, as a pedestrian, and as a driver. And so we're looking to make safety improvements at that intersection. So I have an image of that, but what all those safety improvements are intended to do is to slow vehicles down as they travel through the intersection, which will then have the effect of making South Holly Street a more comfortable street to park along. And as more parking occurs there, there'll be more friction along the street. It'll be more, it all helps to work together to make that a better street to park on. And additionally, we will have a bike lane connecting across the street, and we really want to make it a safe, comfortable, easy way for pedestrians, for bicyclists to walk to the destinations in their neighborhood, to bike to those destinations. So all of these changes are being made based on your feedback.
Sam, can I just interject for 1 second? I know that we're having an issue with our captions being available. So I know that someone asked for CART providing some captions to this evening's meeting. And we did send a link to that person, but we also have a phone number if you're having issues accessing captions. That phone number is 720-838-3737. Again, 720-838-3737. So I've responded to the questions with a link to where the captions can be located. And also if that's not working, please give our caption person a call and they can help get that set up. Sorry, Sam, for the interruption.
No, thank you for that, Ashley. I appreciate that. Okay, and then another piece of feedback that we consistently received was, well, there are homes along East Jewell Ave that do not have driveways. And so we actually did an inventory to determine exactly how many properties there are along the corridor that don't have driveways. And through our research, we determined, in fact, there are 2. So every other property that either fronts or has a side yard along East Jewell does have a driveway where folks can park off of the street. And, that's one of the things we're recognizing. One of the reasons why that parking use is likely lower is people are taking advantage of that off-street parking opportunities today. And so what we wanted to emphasize is that we have specifically made changes for the property at East Jewell and Holly Street to establish parking along Holly Street directly adjacent to that home. And we're also evaluating making South Fairfax an always stop intersection. So we're currently studying that to make traveling across the street and around the street safer and slower. So we have written letters to these two properties. And if you're joining us this evening, if you live in either of these two homes, please reach out to us. We have provided resources. If you are interested in constructing driveway on your property, we provided resources as how to do that. So please reach out to us should you have any questions about that. And as I noted, one of the things that we recognize at this corner property that does not have a driveway, we wanted to make it more comfortable to park along Holly Street. So we will be implementing painted curb extensions at this corner. And these have a few effects. They are helping to establish parking. So should that be a desirable place for that property owner to park, they can park there. But it also is a change that's intended to improve mobility for all people who use this intersection. So by using these painted curb extensions, we're shortening the distance that pedestrians have to cross, as well as we are slowing turning vehicles down as they move through the intersection. We also heard consistently that traffic backs up along this intersection. So we just wanted you all to know that we have submitted a work order to adjust the signal timing to allow more time for vehicles on Jewell to access Holly. So we'll be reducing the congestion at that intersection based on your feedback. We also heard a lot of feedback that there is a concern that if we were to take away parking along the street, then more people are going to have to cross the street. So if you've got friends or family or visitors coming to your home, they're now going to have to cross East Jewell. So when we ever talk about a mobility project, we just want it to be a safety project for all roadway users. So we are going to be adding more crosswalks along the corridor at 3 locations, at Glencoe, at Kearney, and at Oneida, to make it easier for people to cross the street. We're also studying an always stop at East Jewell Ave and South Fairfax Street. And if we're successful in meeting the criteria to have an always stop, we would be able to mark crosswalks at that location as well. So again, based on your feedback, we are adding more crosswalks along the corridor to make it safer to cross the street.
And Sam, as you kind of move on, I just want to add a really quick note to folks. I see a lot of questions coming up in the chat. Ashley and Jen are really working hard to send those to us so we can answer as many as we can. And I also want to remind people that a lot of this information, a lot of the questions and concerns you have are being addressed throughout this presentation too. So kind of keep focused on that as well as entering in some questions, because I see a lot of questions in there that are being addressed throughout the evening. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And so just wanted to note too, we heard about visibility and lighting was poor along the I-25 bike and ped bridge. So we took that feedback and we've actually installed new lighting along the I-25 bridge. It's a brighter light to really help light that up. And then we are installing mirrors along the bridge to improve visibility based on your feedback. On the next slide. So on the eastern side of the corridor, we have a very great asset for the community, the Highline Canal Trail, but we heard from you all that accessing that trail can be confusing. There's actually a social path a little bit north of the actual connection to the trail. So we'll be adding wayfinding to make it easier for you all to navigate to the Highline Canal Trail along Oneida Street. And I've already mentioned this, but, actually, no, I haven't done this one yet. So we've also heard that, folks who are traveling and students and kids who are riding or walking to Highline Academy from the neighborhood face challenges when they're crossing East Evans Ave at South Dahlia Street. And so that's a multi-lane intersection. And that school is really, this is the only route to access it if you're walking and biking. So we are studying safety improvements at this intersection and to determine if there's anything that we can do to improve safety at that location. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brett, and he's going to talk a little bit about the shared roadway versus a bike lane.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, so like Sam said, we're going to talk about a little bit about bike safety and why just not keep Jewell as a shared roadway. So here at the city, we actually first off don't consider a shared roadway as a bike facility. But as shown in the graphic here on the left, the traffic speeds and volumes along East Jewell are such that they do necessitate us to separate people on bike from the flow of traffic and giving them a designated space to maintain safety and comfort for not only people on bike, but people that are traveling in the roadway. It kind of just clarifies movements a little bit along the roadway. This prevents those higher speed passing events from occurring, and as well, like I mentioned, is consistent with our DOTI engineering standards. And as you can see where that orange dot is, on the bottom of that graphic is speed, on the side is volume. Since we're kind of at the higher end of what we could consider for a bike lane, we've also added a buffer, which you can see here on the bottom right of the screen, to better separate people that are traveling on bike from those motorist travel lanes. You can go to the next slide. And we know from research that wider travel lanes lead to higher motorist travel speeds. And this is the case along Jewell, where we have speeding issues. Because of this, we definitely want to make sure that the bikes have their own space and aren't sharing that space with motorists that we see are traveling at high rates of speed along portions of Jewell at 33 miles an hour, which to us, when we're trying to put a bikeway along the road, that's a very high speed. So putting them in their own bike lane has been seen to increase the rates of cycling, of course, by giving them a designated space, are more comfortable to ride in, and most importantly, decrease crash rates. In fact, the graphic on the right here illustrates some international research, which has shown that just a 10-mile-an-hour change in the speed can have exponential effects on fatality and severe injury rates. You can see, going from 30 to 40 miles an hour, you actually increase your likelihood of fatality and severe injury by about 33%. And so really, like as Sam mentioned in the previous slides, this is really a safety project for all, with the thought that really slower speeds can save lives. Next slide. And so here's kind of the data behind what I was talking about. Some data showing the speed issues that we're referring to on Jewell. While the posted speed is 25 miles an hour, we're seeing regular speeds of 28 miles an hour in the western portion to 31 miles an hour here on Jewell. You'll see 85th percentile referred to on this slide. Basically, that means that 85% of people are traveling at that speed or lower. 28 miles an hour or lower here, and then 31 miles an hour or lower on the east side, which doesn't mean that we even have higher speeds than that, because we do. And so while we're narrowing the travel lanes to mitigate some of this, we also received some comments about adding speed bumps. And sorry if my voice is breaking up a little bit. Hopefully you can hear me now, and we can answer any questions if you don't hear me in the question and answer section. But while we're narrowing the travel lanes to mitigate some of these speeds, we have received some comments about adding speed humps, which this kind of leads us to look at the role of Jewell in the network. It is designated as a collector. So that means it functions as connecting from local neighborhood streets to the larger arterial roadways in this area. And so because of this, speed humps aren't really appropriate treatment for that, for Jewell. And in fact, we think this could result in unwanted increase in traffic and speeds on our parallel neighborhood streets that we usually like to see lower speeds and volumes. Yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to Sam to talk a little bit more about street operations.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. So this is just a handful of questions that we frequently get because this project does represent a change for your community. And there's just practical questions about how does kind of life go on as you live it now with this change coming in the future. And so we just wanted to be transparent about how we can address these changes in your community and how other similar projects such as East Florida Ave, where parking was removed to implement a similar bike lane, how these changes have been addressed. So one is ADA concern. And so if you do have a handicap permit and you do not have a driveway in front of your property, we do have a process by which we can establish a parking space in front of your home. So if this is the condition that you do have, please reach out to us and we can work with you on that specific concern. Another thing that we were asked is where do I put my trash, my recycling, my compost? And the response to that is the same place you put it today. The street's wide enough that we can put that trash can out there and you still have enough space to have the bikes ride by that. Question about where should my landscapers park, and if we're doing a home renovation. So landscapers, they can park in your driveway or they can park around the corner. In terms of a home renovation, if you have a big project and say you need a dumpster, we do have a process and a permitting process for closing off the bike lane. And so if you have any questions about that, if you've got a project coming up, reach out to us. We can let you know what that process is all about. And then similarly, where do deliveries park? So the answer to that is really on those side streets. We have many streets in Denver where parking is not permitted, and those delivery vehicles are legally not allowed to park in the bike lanes. So with that, Afor, I wanted to pass it back to you, and we can open it up. I know we have a lot of questions and wanna.
We've got a lot of questions. Okay, so there's nearly 100 questions that we have in the Q&A. Ashley has been really working diligently to try to get some of those over to us. And I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things again. We only have limited time. We have extended the amount of time that we have this evening to answer questions for you, but we'll still only be able to get to so many of them. So we prioritize questions again that we haven't heard before, that haven't been addressed throughout the evening, that we haven't had a chance to talk about. So those will be the questions we'll definitely try to get to first. And then as time allows, we'll get through as many other ones as possible. And then also a reminder that we'll have all of the meeting materials and information available after the meeting. So we'll start ahead with the first question. Sam, I think we're going to be with you a lot here this evening, but we've got one question that we'll start with. So what happens to the bike lane between Niagara and Oneida? Sidewalks do not exist for that stretch, and at the edge of the existing asphalt is crumbling. So what happens to that bike lane between Niagara and Oneida?
So yeah, so on the eastern portion of the corridor, and again, the implementation limits are now from Cherry Street all the way to Oneida. And you're correct. We've heard, the sidewalks either don't exist or they're in poor condition on the eastern side of the corridor. And so what we frequently find is pedestrians are walking at the edge of the road or even in the road. So while the bike lane will be established, what this is actually going to provide is more space between where drivers are driving and where pedestrians are now walking on the side of the road. So it's going to create a safer condition for pedestrians where those sidewalks are not in good shape or in fact, they do not exist.
Okay, great, thank you. Brett, we have a question for you. Is there an option to just lower the speed limit to increase safety for everybody?
Great question. And this is one that we get a lot. And Jen actually might be able to speak to more of the citywide efforts here. There are a couple citywide efforts. You might have heard the 20 is plenty. But as we stand, our 25-mile-an-hour posted speed limit that we have there is about as low as we go for the most part. And in order to do this, we do need to see some different conditions in order to lower that speed, even if we did want to go under 25. But again, there is like a citywide effort that is a much longer kind of process that that our Vision Zero team is looking into right now. The 20 is plenty, and that's obviously not going to be tackled with this project. But great question. I'm not sure if Jen or others have other things to say about.
Maybe Brett, you could talk a little bit about how sometimes just dropping the speed limit doesn't actually result in lower speeds.
Correct. Right. And as we can see through the speed data, even with the speed limit being 25 miles an hour, we see quite a majority of folks going over that. And so even if we were to change the sign, that's not going to do much for those speeds. So one of our mitigations, as we've been mentioning, and all the safety improvements that Sam talked about, and even delineating narrower space on the roadway because of the bike lanes, we were hoping that would help to slow those speeds down instead of just trying to change the sign. We do need to do something about the geometric state of the roadway in order to encourage slower speeds. Good point, Sam.
Great, and so that kind of answers another question that we had about how a bike lane can lower the speed of traffic. And so you talked a little bit there about that, how narrowing that roadway. I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that. That was covered a little bit, but we just had that question in as well.
Yeah, and with the roadway as wide as it is right now, and the parking utilization as low as it is right now, like Sam mentioned, you do have a very wide roadway to speed down. And putting some striping on the side actually, and kind of pushing the cars more inward kind of creates a little bit of that friction to slow down that traffic. I guess that's the kind of simple short answer to that for.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. So maybe a couple other questions for you, Brett, since I just saw you go on mute. But a couple other questions here, particularly as they relate to parking. One of them, the study that was done in January about the parking counts. Can you tell us why that was done in January? There's a remark here about parking in the snow is reduced due to the snow plows building plowed snow along the curb. So can you tell us why January was chosen for the parking study?
Sure, I might actually pass that one to Sam if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So when we did the parking count, we wanted to do that before the first public open house, which was held in February. And what we see, humans have very predictable behavior. We go to the same places pretty much every day, and we kind of park in the same places every day. And so we've done hundreds of hours of parking studies across the city. And what we find time and time again is, even though it seems like a very short amount of time that we collected data, by taking those snapshots, we can actually we can extrapolate that to cover most of the day. So again, while it seems like a short period, based on the hundreds of hours of data that we've collected, we see that if we collect them early in the morning, so that's when people haven't left for work yet, so we want to capture that. We want to capture, mid-morning to see perhaps there's some uses along the corridor that might operate a little bit later in the day. And then we want an evening count. So now people have gotten back from work, or maybe the folks that work different schedules, we want to make sure we capture them. And then we look at how those periods change. And so on some corridors, we see a lot of change. We might see it really heavily parked at one interval, and that could encourage us to collect more data. But what we saw across East Jewell is that you really had consistently low parking over all of those different time periods that we collected the data. And that's a real indication to us that this is how people use the parking along the corridor today. Yes,
Great.
and that really highlights that. Those green bars again, so we're seeing the percentage use across those periods, changed by a matter of 2%.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, we continue to get kind of comments and questions about parking on both sides of the street. So maybe this is back to Brett. why does it have to be eliminated on both sides of the street? That's what people are really kind of wanting to know.
And Brett, maybe while you're going to that, Mark, if you could go to the cross-section slide, Brett can show the width of the street.
Yeah, actually go down. There we go. Okay. Great. So as we mentioned, in order to have a full bike lane, we need at least 6 feet per direction. And so if you can kind of total up first of all, if you can kind of total up the widths there, that leaves us with only 4 extra feet. By keeping 2 10-foot travel lanes and then having 2 6-foot bike lanes, it only leaves us 4 extra feet, and we need at least 7 to 8 feet for our actual parking lane. And like I mentioned, not only that, but we are the volumes and speeds along this corridor. We're almost at the point where we need to do what we call protected bike lane, where we put actual vertical elements in the buffer, but we're not necessarily there, and it was not there yet. We're on the higher end of our bike lane, and so when we're on the higher end of our bike lane, we like to add a little bit more space between people on bike and people on motorists that are moving at higher speeds. And so that's why that buffer, that extra 4 feet, were designated either side to add a 2-foot buffer.
Good. Thank you for that. I've got some other comments, questions, trying to figure out the best place to fit them in here. So we've got a concern as it relates to kind of, the shared roadway and buffered bike lane. So there's a concern that, if cars are going too fast to make it a shared roadway, why is it safer now for individuals to have to cross the street to get to their car? So Sam, is that a question you want to try to help us address?
Yeah, so what we're seeing today, and Mark, maybe if you just go one slide down, is effectively what we have, or sorry, up, wrong direction there, yeah, perfect. So what we have today, we have really low parking use along East Jewell. So what it looks like is a wide open street. You can imagine, when you drive on a highway, we've got 14-foot travel lanes, and we can comfortably drive 75 miles an hour. And so wider travel lanes are associated with the ability to feel more comfortable driving faster. The goal of a safety project like this is to make it not comfortable to drive faster. And so when we can narrow travel lanes, we can actually visually make visual cues for drivers that it's not appropriate, it's not comfortable to drive faster. So by striping the bike lanes along this corridor, we're going to start to, that cone of vision is going to be more narrow when it's a wide open street. And I think, the traffic data is helping us to tell this story. We see the speeding because people feel comfortable driving on it, and we want to actually make that less appealing, less comfortable. And then for the pedestrians crossing, we want to increase the visibility that they're crossing the street. So that's why we're adding crosswalks along the corridor. That's why we're studying a new location to add an all-way stop. We heard a lot of feedback on the west side of the corridor that, more homes front the street. We anticipate more crossing behavior there. So that's why we're studying that intersection, because if we can have a stop sign there, and again, crosswalks on all the approaches, we can increase the visibility that pedestrians are crossing the street. All of this works together. It's not a silver bullet solution. We need it all. We need the crosswalks, we need the striped bike lanes to help create a safer street. And the approach that we're taking today is really oriented at that.
And I might add to that, if I may, Sam, that this is obviously not the last time that we can touch this roadway. And of course, we're doing this with the intention of increasing safety, and we're always iterating as a city. And so we always have 3-in-1 and other things. And also we can continue to monitor speeds. If we need to do an additional level of intervention to get speeds down, if we still see these high levels of speeds, there are additional interventions that we can do that do not exclude this bike lane, that would not take away the bike lane, but that would just add additional treatments. that we could do to continue to mitigate those speeds. But we'd want to see the bike lane in there for a little bit, let it be in there for a little bit, let traffic patterns settle, see where speeds are, and then we can continue to iterate on getting those speeds down.
And Brett, can you remind us again, this was a question, when that speed and volume data was captured, one of our participants said it looks like it's new data. Maybe that would be Sam. How's that answer?
Yeah, so one of the pieces of feedback that we heard when we did an initial round of data collection along the corridor was their perception that there's speeding. And Ashley is the community designer. We talked quite a bit about this, about how the community through 311 was saying, hey, speeding's an issue. In the first round of data collection that we did, didn't exhibit that as much. And one of the things that we recognized was that the data was collected very close to stop signs. So people were slowing down on the approach to those stop signs or coming right off the other side. And so when we did an additional round of data collection, we were very strategic. And based on your feedback, we selected different locations further from those stop signs to see if the speeding situation was different. So what we wanted to emphasize is that based on your feedback, we collected more data, and the data that came back from that is in line with what you all have been telling us, that speeding is an issue.
Okay, thank you for that. So kind of switching gears a little bit here about all the different kind of safety improvements that we've seen go into this design. We do have one individual who feels like, there hasn't been any compromises made, but we have talked a lot about the intersection improvements, the parking adjustments for Esters. We did talk a lot about some of the compromises, the approach to where the bike lane will end at Cherry. So maybe we can highlight a little bit more some of the improvements. Folks are really excited. I have a comment here. The lighting is going to be awesome. People are excited about some of those safety improvements that we have mentioned. Now, if we're going into crosswalks, let me go here to this one. There's a lot of support for additional safety improvements and those crosswalks. Somebody's asked for a stop sign at Bales or a crosswalk. And I guess the reason here is that there's no cross streets. The closest kind of cross street or intersection is kind of far away. It's 20 homes. So has any consideration been made to that area for crosswalks?
Yeah, so Brett, maybe I can jump in and if you want to add anything to that. So we do have a pretty rigorous process for where we determine new crosswalks can be added. And so we actually saw that between Dahlia and to the east, to the next crosswalk location that we're adding through this project is about 800 feet on both sides. That's a pretty long distance to have another crosswalk. So that's why we're targeting Fairfax as that location. In addition to that, there's a lot of homes that front the corridor in that part of the street. And so we want to provide more crossing opportunities there. It certainly doesn't preclude us from studying additional locations. And if that's feedback, if you want us to do a study at that spot, we can certainly do that. Again, there is criteria that we have to meet. And if we meet that, we can move forward with an improvement. If we don't, we'd have to kind of study next steps. But if that's something folks are interested in studying, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, it seems like that might be something we can look into. They've said here, Bales and Jewell, there's a lack of visibility. The closest side street is at least not for 20 homes. So that could be something definitely for us to look into there.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. We appreciate that.
Yes. Okay, so let's see here. We have people are excited about the parking options for Esther. We've got some folks who are like, that's a great solution. We have other folks I saw in the chat, people are like, why are we giving designated parking to establishments that are serving alcohol? And then we've also heard, so what about Skyline, the swim club there? People were wondering if we reached out, and Sam and you did have a conversation, or at least I did. So how can we address some of their parking issues? I know we've talked about they have several large events there a year. Where do those people park when they come in? If there's 50 extra cars coming into some of those swim meets, what are some of the suggestions that we can offer?
Yeah. Hey, right before I pivot to answer that question, I did want to emphasize, we talked too about, providing the parking around Esther's Pub. Dottie endorses walking to the pub. And I say that a little as a joke, but seriously, we are really advancing safety improvements at the intersection of Holly and Jewell, that's going to have a real benefit for pedestrians. So the scope of those changes, while there is some benefit to parking along Holly Street, it really is oriented at making it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians to move through that intersection, as well as vehicles, making sure they're slowing down. Ashley, I might actually ask you to talk a little bit about your conversation with Skyline and the outreach we did there.
So yeah, offer definitely take Skyline. Before you do, actually, I do want to just talk a little bit more about, we have had a lengthy conversation with the owners of Esther's Pub. And I guess to respond to the comments we've been receiving, there's been comments about subsidizing parking for Esther's, and that's not what we're doing. One of the pieces of feedback we have heard consistently, and even prior to this, this bike project moving forward, was that there are concerns about parking on Esther's overflowing into the neighborhood. And so because we were in the area and providing a lot of engineering analysis, we had the opportunity to look at that area specifically where we know there's an existing parking issue. And we're able to identify an opportunity to improve the parking, the number of parking spots around that area. And again, that really dovetailed nicely with this project, which there are the parking concerns. And the second thing I want to note, and I know you didn't bring this up before, but I've seen this a lot in the chat, is the development, that old CDOT development, and how that's occurring pretty much adjacent to Esther's, and what that will do to the neighborhood. And you know, Atlantic won't, what we're doing in Atlantic won't be good enough. And so part of my role is to help ensure that as development projects move through, as major capital projects move through, we are aware of the local context. So we will be working with our development services team as that development continues to move through. They will have very specific parking requirements, et cetera, to ensure that they are meeting the demand that they will be creating. And I know that for a fact that the owner of Esther's has been reaching out to them as well, trying to think about maybe some creative parking solutions, some shared conditions, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, we've heard about that concern around that CDOT space. And you know, we as a department work hard to understand the local context so that as major developments occur, they are making improvements to the right-of-way to help mitigate the impact that they'll be bringing in terms of additional users of the area. So I just want to let you know that we are aware of that development and its relation to this area, and are working with them to ensure that we try to get the best outcome as possible. But anyway, with that, Afur, back to you. Conversations with Skyline.
Yeah, so I did have a couple conversations with Skyline, and you know, the biggest concern they had is as you know, in the community, there's several big swim meets there and other events a year, so maybe 5 or 6 times, where they'd be really using that overflow, so they flow out into maybe possibly parking along Jewell in the past. And so the team, I would like maybe to kind of address what we do in situations like that. You know, I think there is sufficient parking. The parking on the side streets is unrestricted, and so that's been an option that we've shared in the past, since it is kind of a periodic need and there's not as many cars on those side streets that you might expect. And so if there's other solutions that the team might want to share to how we handle some of those demands on those periodic basis, maybe we can do that here.
Yeah, Afur, maybe we can, and Mark, if you could navigate to the overall parking slide a little further up. So I think this parlays into another piece of feedback that maybe we didn't cover as directly, is that, you know, as we push, you know, if parking is no longer along Jewell, it's going to push folks into the neighborhood. I think that's the same concern. That's the root of the concern with the Skyline Tennis Club. And so what we actually did is we collected data along all of the side streets along Jewell to determine, you know, is there any excess capacity to handle more parking along those streets. And what we found you know, around where the tennis club is that we're seeing a lot of green bars, a lot of blue bars. So, you know, in that 0 to 30% used, even along those side streets. Most of the side streets, in fact, have homes with driveways as well. So parking conditions are relatively similar, though we do see some blocks with higher use. But none of those blocks are fully used. And so if we have a big event and, you know, that there's 6 days a year where there's going to be parking demand, we see in other parts of town that, you know, the neighborhood is able to absorb that. And we really need to plan for the typical uses of the corridor, and safety is our priority. And so we need to maximize safety, maximize our complete network. And so that's why we recognize that concern and the change that it's going to bring about. But again, that's kind of our perspective on that.
Right. I saw this one just come in recently, and I have to ask it now because it kind of makes me smile. So somebody wants to know, where do I apply to close the bike lane for construction or a party? Let's say pre-COVID party, maybe even post-COVID world as well. If we really need to find a way to allow parking in that bike lane for some period of time, whether it's construction, will the permit cost money? You highlighted that a little bit at the end there, Sam. Does that permit cost money to residents?
Yes, so there is a fee associated with that. And whoever has asked that question, I'd encourage you, just shoot us an email. And we also will have a follow-up, as Jen mentioned, given the comments, and we can put a little bit more information about what that process is for other people that are interested in that. So we'll make sure that's on the website, and there'll be a push out to make sure people that join tonight have access to that as soon as it's available.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask Jen a question, if you're available, Jen, just to kind of give Sam a little bit of a break here. Wondering about the future usage of this corridor for bikers and pedestrians. Has there been any data collected as to how many will be using this bike lane, or how many are using it now? Is the demand that high, or is this just kind of our progressive approach to preparing for the future?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think we really try to be proactive as a city and ensure that we kind of, use that old adage, if you build it, they will come. So we do see a lot of bikers. We're even seeing the comments, that 4 bikers have ridden by right now. I think they were in the middle of the lane, and now they'll have a safe place to be able to move about the corridor. But really it's about providing that safe place, just as we're providing that equal opportunity to vehicles to move. Certainly we know that cars are going to be driving in our city, and also want the opportunity for the multi-mobility. So as a city, we don't really look at, kind of warrants, if you will, like to get to we have to have a certain amount of people riding or walking in order to put a sidewalk or a bike in. We really just look at this as critical infrastructure to allow our residents to move in a safe way, with lots of options and opportunity, whether you're driving, biking, walking, or taking transit.
Great. Thank you for that, Jen. So kind of going back to parking, we heard a lot at the beginning. We knew that parking was going to be a big issue for a lot of folks who want to be addressed, a big concern. We do have a question specifically on Cherry Street. They're wondering if they can have resident-only parking on Cherry Street. Perhaps Sam?
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have heard feedback about the parking along Cherry Street, and we've actually, my colleagues have worked with the neighborhood to address some parking concerns related to parking along Cherry Street. And we actually evaluated some changes that we made, actually maybe it was a couple of years ago, to see how those changes have addressed some of the concerns along the corridor. And in our communication with the council office and residents and some stakeholders, our perspective was that was helping to mitigate the issues that were present. Now, that said, if there are continuing issues, let us know, and it's something that we can look into. Again, we had evaluated that in the past. We have made changes. Those changes seem to be helping, but if there's more to be done, let us know.
Great, thank you. Now, a couple of questions, in regards to the project as a whole. I know that a lot of folks maybe are feeling like, their voices haven't been heard throughout the process. Wondering, what kind of say do people have? We've really tried to implement a lot of feedback into this project and into this design. People are wondering, what say do I have in this project and it going forward? One lady in particular, she says she lives with several women. She's concerned about safety crossing the street. just kind of a lot of additional just concerns, and people are wondering, well, what say do we have now moving forward? Possibly Jen or Sam, do you want to try to address that?
Yeah, for maybe we go to, so I guess I need a little bit of a clarification. Are you saying in terms of next steps, or are you saying how did that feedback actually help us to change the project?
Yeah, I think, highlighting some of that, and then people are really just wondering, I think the chat, we've got over 200 questions in there. I've glanced and I know that there's just frustrations. And so maybe even being able to talk about, again, how this project came to be. So maybe highlighting that in the beginning, that could be a good position for Jen to come in and share like how this project came to be, and then where we plan to go from here. So maybe a couple of those slides and kind of refreshing people on how this project got to where it's at and where we plan to take it.
Yeah, sure, happy to. And so, I think as we kind of kicked off, your input and feedback is critical. And I can tell you, the amount of work that the team has done to really start to identify additional elements that we can pull in to address all the great ideas that have really come through this process. And it would not, if we were just kind of in our offices working, it would be a bike lane on the corridor. And now we have, I would say, a multimodal project along here with, additional parking coming in, with lighting, with additional crosswalks, operations of a signal to give more green time to pedestrians. So, the list goes on. And I think hoping that you can see that certainly that feedback has been critical. Balancing those trade-offs, certainly, we have mobility goals, we have safety goals that we need to meet as a city. And so that's the challenge, right? That we live in every day, as to how do we start to balance that to make sure that these improvements serve the community, but also look at the more regional connectivity of where people are trying to move. And so, from the beginning in 2011, this corridor was identified as a critical need, really connecting into the pedestrian bridge over Colorado. And then again in 2015, it was identified as a critical connection, understanding that many of you may not have been a part of that conversation. And until, it really starts to, you feel the impact is when we start to hear your voice. But certainly appreciate everything that has come in, and hope that you see that we've done our best to incorporate what we can, but also balance the needs of the city.
And Jen, thank you for saying that. And maybe we, Mark, if you go back down to the very bottom of the slide, there's a map that I think characterizes the changes that we've made to this project. And what I wanted to also emphasize is when we have a bicycle project identified in a plan, we know from an engineering perspective what it takes to implement that bike lane. So Mark, if you just go up a few, one more there, perfect. We know how to engineer a bike lane, but we need your feedback to understand how, what other mobility issues or challenges that you have. And if this bike lane comes in, those more crosswalks, we didn't know that. We didn't know that you needed more crosswalks necessarily from the outset, but responding to that, we are installing more crosswalks. So all the things Jen mentioned, I just wanted to make sure that people kind of got a holistic view. All the colors on this map, with the exception of the blue line of the bike lane, is really responses to your feedback, to changes that you've given us over the last 6 months. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I hope that you recognize that we really were doing our best to listen, to achieve our overall mobility goals, to make a project that reflects your community's values.
Yeah, and a couple of things I was going to say is that I have heard, we've kind of talked about how this project and this design really is not the same design that we started with, and it really is because of the community that it has altered so much. I kind of forgot that we have some more slides to get through. So maybe what we'll do at this point is just kind of finish up. We just have a few more slides. This is one of the slides that we were going to share with you. We'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll have a little bit more time here at the end to answer some more questions that you have.
Yeah, and so I think I was going to just cover that overall mobility map for. So Mark, if you just go to the next slide there. Yeah, so again, just our commitment, and we heard a lot, and we really did our best to listen. And what we also wanted to really communicate was a schedule. I think for that question that you asked, the root of it is, I think it was, well, what did our feedback do over the last 6 months, and what can we expect going forward? And so what we wanted to emphasize is that connection between Oneida and South Cherry Street to get to the I-25 bike bridge is a critical regional connection. Obviously, the light rail station gets us all points, and then on the east, Cherry Creek Trail. Both anchors, both sides of this are critical regional connections. So that portion of the bike lane is moving forward, and parking would be removed from both sides of the street for that extent. And so tonight, July 16th, we're at the design intent meeting. We'll be finishing the design. There's a couple of questions that came up tonight, so we've got a little bit more homework to do on that, maybe some crosswalk studies, and then we'll be finishing the design. And then our goal is to install this project in the month of August. So the schedule is quick, and we wanted to be transparent about that. But again, we've been working really, really hard over the last 6 months to take your feedback and improve this design while also meeting the intent for our overall mobility goals. So wanted you to have clarity on that schedule. So again, installed in the month of August, and notification of the installation of the project will be arriving for all properties who live along the corridor prior to construction start. And so I think those were the last two, and we just wanted to make sure we've got enough comments for that. And the only thing
I do have another question here, and that kind of speaks a little bit to maybe some of the information you just shared. When we're looking at our streets and our corridors and how we find the best way to use them to meet the most needs of our city, people are kind of wondering what kind of say do they have over the streets in front of their houses? What kind of ownership do they have over the streets in front of their houses?
So
Sam, sorry.
Was that for me or?
Yeah, I'll throw that one to you.
Okay. Yeah, so streets and the public right-of-way fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, which we all work for. So it's our responsibility to manage the public right-of-way to the highest and best use. It is part of our mission to maximize safety on our streets. We are a Vision Zero city, and so what we wanted to communicate is that the ownership of that street, it's the city's street, but DOTI has jurisdiction over how changes to the streets are implemented. And Jen, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, but essentially we wanted to communicate that.
Yeah, I think, from a technical standpoint, sure, the ownership, the operation, the maintenance of the public right-of-way is under the jurisdiction of DOTI. But of course, working with you as the community members to understand how we prioritize that starting in 2011, right, with that good work on what was happening with a network from bikes, again in 2015, and then the 6 months that we've had with you. So although, it's kind of our responsibility, we develop that based on public feedback, public input, and making sure that we're working really closely with the residents to, figure out how these trade-offs, understand that change is hard, but how do we best balance the trade-offs as we move forward?
Great. Thank you for that. And I do want to backpedal a little bit. This question has been up for a little while, and this is for Brett. Looking at the right turn at Monaco and Holly, we're wondering if cars are allowed to use the bike lane to wait to turn right there. Would you be able to answer that for us?
Sure. Good question. The short answer is, when we change that striping, and when we put a bike lane on that road, no, that the bike lane is not technically allowed to be used for motorists taking a right turn. In fact, there only will be 8 feet there, and it's an unsafe condition. And also, when we're talking about pedestrian safety, actually, as number of travel lanes goes, to have multi-lane approaches is more risky to crossing pedestrians. If you think of, especially if there's not a designated lane there. And so if you think of a car, say at Holly, waiting to go through eastbound in the travel lane, and someone were to come up on the right side of that car while there's a crossing pedestrian, that crossing pedestrian might not see that car coming, that car might not see that pedestrian. And so actually from a pedestrian safety standpoint, it's going to be a lot safer for us to keep that one lane at that intersection, kind of even getting to some of the pedestrian crossing concerns that we've heard tonight.
Okay, yeah, good, thank you. That kind of leads me back to a couple other questions around pedestrian crossing. Going back, I guess, first to the question about Bales and Jewell, the crossing there, we do want to emphasize that we will be looking into that. Sounds like we've had several people kind of still asking questions about that. We understand there's a blind spot there, and we have it in our notes here to look into this intersection. There was another question here on pedestrians. I guess, oh yeah, so sidewalks. You know, we do prioritize pedestrians. People are wondering, why don't we prioritize more sidewalks? And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Jen, this could maybe be a good question for you to help us talk a little bit about, you know, the network for multi-mobility and things, and prioritizing more sidewalks. Maybe the sidewalk gap effort that we have underway.
Yeah, sure. So we, just as we do with the bike network, we also have a pedestrian trails plan that was developed as part of the Blueprint Suite. So we do have a really good plan in place that helps us understand what that network starts to look like. It also prioritizes the projects. And so we have many focus on this, a lot of focus, and the bond allocated a significant amount of funding for sidewalks. It's not necessarily in this area, but if you're interested, you could, you know, message us and we can certainly provide more information. Certainly, you know, just as all modes, you really can't think of things separately, because whether we're a biker, right, majority of their time, we're going to walk at some point in time. We're certainly going to have to get into our vehicle and drive, and likely take transit. So we think of this as a multimodal network, and why you're seeing the crosswalks come in, lighting coming in to ensure that from all modes and all perspectives of people moving about the city, that we're providing what we need. I see that, you know, there's some comments about very narrow sidewalks. We call those Hollywood sidewalks, and they're all over our cities. We see those in the, you know, you know, 1950s kind of development. And those, you know, we prioritize our gaps first. So there's many places across the city that don't have any sidewalks. And these could be in locations that are high priority, which we would consider connection to transit and where people are trying to go, like grocery stores, medical, schools, and employment. And so those are our first priority. And we look at these in tiers. And then we look at the deficient sidewalk, is what we would call that 2-foot kind of Hollywood sidewalk. And there is a program in place that works to, you know, figure out what that starts to look like. And we're working kind of more in the core right now, but there are opportunities, and certainly it is a focus of ours. Don't want anyone to walk away feeling like all we do is bike implementation. We look at all mode. We have a transit team, a bike and ped team, a Vision Zero team. So we really look at all the modes together to understand what improvements are needed.
Great, thank you. Speaking of some additional improvements too, we do have a comment here about the lighting. We mentioned lighting near the bridge, and not sure exactly who would be the best person to answer this question. But there's a concern that, you know, we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration the residents that are local to that lighting, and ensuring that it's the best lighting that's least intrusive as possible to those local homes. And I'm not sure if that's something that someone here on the team feels comfortable addressing at this point, or just kind of acknowledging that that's something we want to look into. Sam, do you feel comfortable with that?
I might pitch that to Brett.
Brett?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that lighting, as you might know, is in response to a previous incident that we're responding to. And what that lighting is going to be doing is upgrading to LED Cobrahead lighting, which is brighter. But in general, that lighting will be aimed at the path itself. So when they actually install that Cobra head, it looks like a Cobra head, it actually will be shining down on the path. But there are ways, if that still is not suffice enough, we do have ways to put kind of blinders on that light to make sure that that light is only casting where we want it to cast. And of course, we don't want it to cast into a home. And so if that ends up being the case, please let us know. You can use your 311 channels to do so, and we can make sure to take care of that.
All right, thank you. We do have a new question on here. What is a Vision Zero city? And I know everybody here can probably talk with us a little bit about that. Sam, you want to answer that question and tell folks a little bit more about what Vision Zero is and what it means to be a Vision Zero city?
Certainly, yeah. So Vision Zero is the vision to reduce serious fatalities and injuries on our streets to zero. The reason that we use the number 0 is we recognize there is no other number that is acceptable. And fatalities and serious injuries on our streets are preventable. And one of the best tools that we have in our toolbox is to design safer streets. So when Jen talked about all of our mobility programs, they're all oriented at helping us to achieve that goal. And again, 2030 is our vision. At the first presentation we had in our public open house, we had some information about how the rates of fatalities have actually been trending up and outpacing our population growth. Obviously, we've had rapid population growth, but that fatality rate has been growing. So it is one of the #1 priorities of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to get that number to 0 in a decade. And so we're working really, really hard. And this project is one of the ways that we achieve that vision. And like I said, we have projects like this going on all over the city, and sidewalk projects, intersection projects, transit projects, all working towards helping us create the safest city that we possibly can.
Great, thank you for that. I have a question here I'm trying to figure out, and maybe this is a little bit about kind of what you're just responding to about Vision Zero efforts. So Dahlia, the Dahlia bike lane, I have somebody here that says, can we just get that started right away? Do we have any updates on that or any of the other projects in the area that we want to highlight?
Yeah, so we have a few triggers that are used to help us advance bicycle projects in Denver, and why we're here tonight is paving is one of those major drivers. So the portion of Dahlia that crosses Evans, and I did look into our 5-year paving plan, it's actually not on that list. But that said, that doesn't preclude us from figuring out other ways to advance a project more quickly. So if that's something that the community is interested in us evaluating, please continue to let us know, and we can work to try to get that into our pipeline.
Well, thank you. So it looks like we have a new question. So talking a little bit more about what the bike lanes will look like, particularly some of these buffered bike lane projects. Are there, concrete barriers or vertical elements that are going to be really intrusive to cars so people can see where they can be or where they can't turn?
Yeah, so Brett, and maybe Mark, we could go back to that slide that shows the Bikeway facility continuum, our graphic from our manual. And, Brett made the good point that this is kind of on the cusp of a protected bike lane, but the answer is this project will not include any vertical elements or curbs, things of that nature. And the reason being is that the street does have a lot of homes that front the corridor, and there are a lot of driveways, and to implement a continuous vertical barrier would be really challenging along this corridor. And again, sticking with our guidance, it's still within that green. So it's a bike lane with a buffer preferred in our guidance. So it's twofold. It's the type of street helps us to kind of dictate that. And also we want to be sticking with our design guidance. So no, there will be no vertical elements.
All right, thank you for clarifying that. We do, as we're continuing on, we've still got some time left, but I do want to acknowledge that we have Councilman Cashman on the meeting with us tonight, as well as his aide, Brent. They've been really, along for the ride with us. They've been really engaged in this project, and we just want to give a little shout out. Thanks for joining us tonight and for being a part of this meeting with us. We do got a little bit more time for some questions. Make sure you're submitting those in. We're really trying to keep track of them here and also making sure that we're prioritizing some of those. Kind of along the lines of, kind of next steps a little bit. So the meeting materials, as we do continue to have questions and things that roll in. Ashley, can you tell us if the update, I guess, to this plan will be available, will be archived? And then also questions, things after the meeting. Can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect after the meeting for materials?
Yeah, absolutely. We have meeting materials from our previous meeting already up on the webpage. We will have these, the notes from this meeting or this presentation, the recorded version of this presentation available as well. We will also work to answer the questions that we did not get to this evening. Those will also be posted. So those are all up on our webpage. I'm trying to remember exactly where that is. I don't know, Sam, if you have that off the top of your head. It's not an easy URL that
Mark, if you go down to the last slide, and then we can put that in, and maybe Francisco, if you would mind chatting that out to the entire.
Sorry, y'all. I clicked all the way past and out of.
So all the contact information that we have for this meeting, we will make sure to send everyone the link to this meeting recording, as well as make sure you have our contact information. If you feel like your questions were not addressed, you can definitely submit those to bikes@denvergov.org.
Oh, and then I guess maybe going back to one of the slides there, Sam, about the operations, we do have a couple of questions again about ADA access. Maybe we can kind of see that question there. People have asked again about trash cans. So we can highlight that again on some of the resources and things available regarding some of those concerns. We went ahead to that slide there. There we go. So particularly, ADA access, how will these changes affect that? We've had a question specifically on that.
Thank you for that. So we definitely have gotten some emails from folks concerned about parking and ADA access to their homes. And so again, we have encountered this on other projects. And what I wanted to emphasize is if your home does not have a driveway, we do have a process, and you do have an existing permit for a resident. We do have a process to establish a parking space there. Now, if you have family or relatives that do have mobility impairments, our recommendation is to, have them park as close to your house in that driveway. But I also want to recognize that might be a change. Today, those people that come over to visit may park directly in front of your house, and cars will have to be shuffled if the driveway might be full. And so we recognize that that's an inconvenience and that's a change. But that said, the process that we've established is really for those homeowners that have a resident with an ADA permit. And if you do fall into that category and you do not have a driveway, please reach out to us and we can provide information on that process.
Great. And this leads to another question that we have that's on the same page regarding delivery vehicles. We have heard some folks that are concerned about the dangers that may cause if delivery vehicles are parked in the bike lane, as people are having to kind of navigate in and out of the bike lane around delivery vehicles. And it says here, that they're not permitted to park in the bike lane. Is there anything we could talk about in terms of enforcement or how that typically works in these bike lane projects?
Yeah, so as we've mentioned here on the slide, no vehicles will legally be allowed to park within that bike lane. And sometimes what we see is that it does take a bit of time for that behavior change to initiate, but know that we have many streets across the city and county of Denver where deliveries are made and parking is not available along those streets. So again, there may be some behavior change time period that needs to take place, but again, vehicles aren't allowed to park there, and over time, delivery drivers will adjust to that change.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the bus-only lanes downtown too. It just kind of takes a while for people to kind of adjust and understand what that new situation looks like. So Brett, we've got a question here. It kind of goes back a little bit. We're talking about speeding and ticketing. Somebody wants to know, are bikers also going to be ticketed if they're speeding down this bike path as well, this bike lane? Want to answer that one for us, Brett?
Sure. I guess, yeah, short answer, of course, that's not within Dottie's purview to ticket people that are speeding. That would be DPD. But the assumption is that, yes, if there are speeding bikers, they would also be ticketed if they're traveling over 25 miles an hour, just like a vehicle would. They are a vehicle, that's why we give them a lane. And so they are within the purview of vehicles that can be ticketed. So.
Yeah, and Brett, I might just add that the average bicyclist travels at about 10 miles per hour.
Good point.
And if you're a little bit more fit, you might be getting up to 12 to 14, but that's typically the speeds that we see.
You've got to
Yeah, but I would just mention, right, if they're not obeying the laws, they're subject to fines just as any other mode is. So absolutely, everybody has to obey the traffic laws that are put in place.
Great. So we've got a few minutes left, and we still continue to get some questions in regarding safety. There's concerns around how this maybe isn't making things safer. I see some comments back and forth about, there is a lot of parking or there's not a lot of parking. If we want to maybe highlight, Sam, if you want to highlight again, go back to the slide there that we talk about all the multimodal improvements that are being made when it comes to particularly safe crossings for individuals. Kind of highlight again here as we're wrapping up all the different improvements that have really made this design different today.
Absolutely, yeah. So what we're really trying to address is providing that dedicated space for bicyclists. So we're able to achieve that with this project. We have the speeding issue along the corridor. Brett mentioned that speed humps aren't a viable solution to that on this corridor, but we can narrow travel lanes, so we're able to achieve that. We've heard a lot of concerns about, well, now we're going to have to cross the street more frequently. And so we are responding to that by marking more crosswalks along the corridor. And as we noted tonight, we are committed to studying more opportunities to increase safety along the corridor in the future. Specifically at South Holly Street, we will be establishing these painted curb extensions to slow vehicles down as they travel through that intersection. And then one thing that we haven't noted tonight is at Monaco, there's actually, it's not a striped right turn lane. There's enough space for it, but currently it just looks like a wide travel lane. So we'll actually be delineating that right turn lane at that specific location. So whenever we can provide more predictability about who is supposed to be where on a street, we know that we can achieve safety benefits. So I think that what I want to emphasize is we realize this is a big change for your community, but it's all rooted in safety.
Thank you, and we really do hope that people have had the chance to kind of see all the new elements to this plan that are really focused around that. And the meeting materials, again, will be available after the meeting on the website there that we have, if we want to go back to that initial page where the website is and the bike email address. People can make sure that they have that jotted down. Kind of maybe a final question, the project completion date, we've got that queued up. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about where we're at again here and then what we can look for completion date?
Absolutely. So our next step is to start, as we show here in the schedule, is to finish that design, and then we're coordinating with our paving team an exact paving date. And we anticipate that this is going to occur in August, though as of today, we do not know exactly when that start date is. We will be sending notification out, and we can also send an update to the mailing list. So if you've signed up for this project and you want to get more clarity on that, we can send out an email once we know the period at which the construction work will start.
Okay, and then that final page there, we want to make sure everybody has the email address and the website where you can find more information. I think it's there at yeah, there it goes at the end. So we really want to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here with us tonight and for spending your evening with us, asking a lot of great questions. And then for all the feedback that you have provided to us throughout the way, particularly even back, January when we started on the design with this project. So we're really just grateful for your feedback. It really has informed a lot of great improvements into this design. We hope if there's anything else that is really urgent that we have missed, please just reach out to us and let us know. But we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for this, for the evening and for the meeting. And is there anybody else who would like to say anything before we sign off?
Thank you so much for your time and for your feedback. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And look for the updated post of the presentation as well as a response to the questions. Know that we weren't able to get to all of them, but I think we were able to address the majority. But look up early next week, we should have everything posted for you. Thanks again for your time.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
You.